The moment Mary announced in front of the entire class that she'd just marry Rich and follow David abroad, the whole room burst into congratulatory cheers. Streamers popped, someone clapped him on the back. Even the teacher chuckled and said, "Well, it's about time, isn't it?" David stood frozen in the middle of the crowd, his expression unreadable, lips tight but curved in a faint, polite smile. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but the sound was drowned by the celebration around him. "You've waited for her since elementary school, right?" one girl said dreamily. "Now she's finally saying yes," said another. David nodded absently, as if the moment was too surreal to process, but deep down, the gears in his head were grinding furiously. He pulled out his phone. New message. Sarah. The name alone stiffened his shoulders. Sarah. Mary's sworn academic rival. Mary had once called her the kind of girl who thinks GPA is a personality trait. Sarah, with her calm expressions and razor-sharp words, had always kept her distance from Mary's circle, which also meant she'd always kept her distance from David until last night. He tapped the notification. "Last night, you were drunk and all over me, now you're standing there acting like her white knight? Are you messing with me?" His stomach dropped. Another buzz. "Looks like I'll have to pay your parents a visit, tell them how their son treats girls like disposable fun. Oh, and David, I'm not the casual type." For a moment, everything else blurred, the voices around him dimmed, the clapping faded, all he could hear was his own pulse thudding violently behind his ears. He looked up. Mary was beaming, posing, waving, pretending to be shy as classmates surrounded her. She had staged this, perfectly timed, perfectly framed. Everyone believed they were getting engaged, that they were finally, officially, a couple. David wanted to laugh. He really did, if only they knew. Just 12 hours ago, he had been downing cocktails at a celebration party. Sarah had been there too, unusually quiet, but not cold. She had sat beside him. He vaguely remembered brushing against her arm, her perfume, the way her eyes lingered on him longer than necessary. He'd chalked it up to the alcohol, to imagination. He didn't even remember what happened after the 5th drink, but Sarah did. She remembered everything. David pocketed the phone and forced a light laugh as someone handed him a mock bouquet from the party decor. "So, when's the wedding?" George joked from the corner, raising a red plastic cup in salute. Mary turned to him and smiled sweetly. "That depends on David," she said. "But it's definitely time I stopped playing games and gave the boy what he's always wanted." The room erupted again. People whistled and hooted. Mary leaned in, whispering against David's ear, "You're welcome." He smiled. The same smile he had perfected over years of pretending. And then he whispered back, so low only she could hear, "Thanks for the smokescreen." Her expression twitched, but before she could respond, he stepped away. Another buzz. Sarah again. He didn't open it this time. He didn't have to. He already knew the rules of this game. He just hadn't expected Sarah to make her move this early, and he certainly hadn't expected Mary to try and claim a prize she had already discarded. This wasn't love, it was a war. David had been labeled Mary's loyal dog since the 4th grade. She'd flick her ponytail and call him over, and like clockwork, he'd appear. When she was bored, he'd bring snacks. When she was cold, his jacket would be on her shoulders before she even asked. The world saw him as obsessed, pathetic even, a boy so blindly devoted that he hadn't realized he'd become the punchline of his own love story. But what no one knew, not even Mary herself, was that the joke was never on David. It was on them. His father had a saying. Out of 10 women, 9 are manipulative, and the 10th is just learning faster than the rest. So if you're going to fall, raise the girl from childhood, make her think she chose you, when really, you raised her to choose no one else. David never quite agreed with the sentiment in full, but he'd be lying if he said it didn't shape his playbook. Mary was never the goal, she was the filter. From the moment he entered the elite private school his father forced him into, he realized he wasn't going to be popular, not with the loud confidence of rich heirs or the soft charisma of student leaders. His strength lay in watching, cataloging, simulating. So he picked Mary. She was loud, pretty, high maintenance, and attention-starved. She collected enemies like accessories and relished in being adored publicly and feared privately. David attached himself to her early. He laughed when she mocked people. He played along when she flirted for fun. He made sure the world saw him as her shadow, and in doing so, he turned Mary into a magnet for the worst kind of people. If someone treated him kindly but remained Mary's friend, they were immediately cut off from his mental list. If someone gossiped with her, followed her every outfit post, reposted her shady captions, cut. If someone openly criticized Mary, had public spats with her, or better yet, got on her blacklist, teensouds, hey, became interesting. It was a slow process, but over the years, he built a web of quiet alliances and watched his circle purify itself. The more Mary dismissed someone, the more David invested in them, quietly, cautiously, always as a friend of a friend. And then came Sarah. She transferred in during sophomore year, silent, scholarly, always one step ahead of everyone academically but never condescending about it. Mary hated her on sight. She acts like she's too good for everyone, she'd complain. And those eyes, like she's judging everyone. Which, in fairness, she probably was. Sarah was everything Mary couldn't fake, authentic, emotionally grounded, academically untouchable. She didn't gossip, she didn't flirt for power, and she never laughed at anything Mary said, even when Mary made jokes at David's expense. That alone caught David's attention, but what sealed it was the cat incident. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when David, hanging back near the art wing to avoid PE, spotted Sarah behind the cafeteria. She was crouched beneath a damp awning, feeding a scrawny ginger cat from a paper lunchbox. Her fingers moved gently, her hair tucked behind one ear, and her eyes, usually narrowed in skepticism, were soft with focus. No one else saw her, not her classmates, not Mary, certainly not George, who was currently wasting his time trying to flirt with Mary and gain access to her influencer circle. David didn't speak, he simply watched for a moment, then left quietly. He waited 3 days before testing the waters. He asked Makoto, Sarah's rumored childhood friend and Mary's failed flirtation experiment, about her. "You want to chase Sarah?" Makoto looked at him like he was joking. "I'm curious," David replied evenly. Makoto shrugged. "She's not like Mary. Sarah doesn't do games. She's strict with herself, traditional values, you know?" David smiled. Exactly the kind of girl he'd never meet through Mary's crowd. Still, the test wasn't complete. Sarah was sharp. A girl like her didn't drop her guard because someone fed a cat or asked nicely. He needed to know more. So he pulled out an envelope, thick and padded. Payment. Makoto's expression shifted instantly. And that's how David got her schedule, her hobbies, and most importantly, the detail about the stray cat she fed every Thursday afternoon. The next week, he showed up at the spot with a bag of imported cat food and a carefully rehearsed line. What a coincidence. Sarah didn't even look up. Not a coincidence, she replied coldly. I saw you talking to Makoto. He blinked, caught off guard. Her eyes finally lifted to meet his, steady and cool. Don't drag him into your shallow love games. David tilted his head. You think this is a game? She stared. He stepped forward slowly, crouched beside her, and reached toward the orange cat. Their fingers brushed. She withdrew hers immediately, disgust flickering in her expression. I'm serious, David. I am too, he said. I asked Makoto about you because I want to pursue you. Silence. He didn't expect her to melt. She didn't. But for the first time, her gaze faltered. That was enough. She stood and left without another word. David didn't follow. He didn't need to. The seed was planted. The next week, he sat 2 rows behind her in chemistry. The week after that, he switched lunch periods, accidentally, to match hers. He answered questions in class, not to show off, but to place himself beside her in group assignments. She never greeted him first, but she stopped walking away. One afternoon, during a shared project presentation, she handed him a piece of chocolate at the end. It's homemade, she said quietly. He took it. Didn't eat it, just smiled. He could feel it, something shifting. Mary noticed too. She wasn't used to being ignored. David had once trailed behind her at every school festival, but now? Now he stayed seated when she walked in. He gave distracted nods when she tried to loop him into her plans. And worst of all, he never laughed at her jokes anymore. When she asked why, he simply said, "You told me to grow up, right? I'm just focusing on more important things." He could see the storm brewing in her eyes. Perfect. He needed her off balance. Sarah, meanwhile, remained unreadable. She never confirmed if she liked him, never texted first, but she replied, sometimes curt, sometimes warm, always late at night, when no one else was around. Once, he'd messaged, "If I had liked you first instead of Mary, do you think we'd be friends now?" She replied 10 minutes later, "I think you'd have scared me off." He laughed, alone in his bed, phone screen glowing against the ceiling. Sarah wasn't soft, but she was real. He could work with real people. He just had to play the long game. And make sure Mary, queen of the crowd, never realized until it was too late that she was the test, not the prize. David was patient, too patient, some would say, but calculated patience was his favorite game. Sarah had become part of his daily routine now, without her ever agreeing to it. He, accidentally, appeared in the library section she used every Thursday. He started joining study groups she was assigned to, and when the seating chart changed, he mysteriously ended up one desk behind her. Every move was rehearsed, timed to perfection. When she turned a corner, he'd be adjusting his sleeve, as if by chance. When she dropped her notes, his hand would already be halfway down, brushing hers as he helped. His smile was always subtle, never loud, never obvious, like he was just there. And yet Sarah didn't bite. She never said anything rude, she didn't tell him to go away, but she didn't make it easy either. She spoke to him when necessary, gave short answers, and when she looked into his eyes, it was like she was sifting through every word he ever said for a lie. Still, David had cracked harder codes. He initiated Phase 2 during the annual campus cleanup day. It was a bright afternoon, they were picking up trash in pairs along the hillside walkway. Sarah, assigned with him by random draw, moved with quiet efficiency, gloved hands gripping a garbage bag. David followed slightly behind, matching her pace. Then came the cat. It wasn't the same orange one, but it was similar, fat, lazy, and overly confident. It darted between Sarah's feet and tripped her as she tried to step over it. She stumbled forward. David moved instantly, arms out. But Sarah, ever quick to recover, swerved away from him out of reflex and landed on her knees in the grass, her elbow scraping across a jagged stone. He crouched beside her, eyes widening as he saw the blood. "Don't cry," he said reflexively, already reaching to lift her up. "I'll carry you." "I'm not crying," she said, clearly holding back pain. "Don't be dramatic." Still, she didn't resist when he lifted her onto his back. As he carried her toward the infirmary, her arms hesitantly looped around his shoulders. She smelled faintly of jasmine and soap. His grip tightened slightly. "You're really light," he murmured, mostly to himself. "Shut up," she hissed into his ear. Her voice wavered, not just from embarrassment, but something else. Her breath was uneven against his neck. Her cheeks flushed, but her arms stayed in place. At the infirmary, she slid off his back before the nurse could see and straightened her posture as if nothing had happened. But David had seen it. The moment her fingers had gripped tighter when she thought he'd slip. It was small, but it was enough. Later that evening, George messaged him. "She didn't stop talking about you to the nurse, said you were annoying, but she smiled the whole time." David chuckled. George had become his inside man. He wasn't subtle, but he was useful, and more importantly, he was jealous. Jealous that Sarah never looked at him the way she looked at David now when she thought no one was watching. Still, Sarah wasn't easy. She wasn't someone who let emotions steer her. She calculated, she tested, she waited for proof. That made her perfect, but it also made things harder. He had to plant deeper seeds. So he began showing up at the local bookstore Sarah volunteered at on weekends. He always ran into her at aisle 5, near the historical fiction section. He picked the books she liked, asked polite questions, let her teach him things, even when he already knew. Sarah started calling him persistent. She never called him sweet, that was fine. Meanwhile, Mary's antennae were rising. At first, she ignored the rumors. Everyone assumed David was doing this just to make her jealous. After all, hadn't he been her loyal fool for a decade? But the third time she saw David ulking to Sarah during lunch break, eyes focused, chin tilted slightly, smiling faintly, she snapped. She caught him alone near the stairwell that evening. "Are you seriously chasing her?" David blinked, perfectly timed confusion blooming on his face. "Huh?" "Don't play dumb," Mary said, stepping closer. "Sarah, Are you actually trying with her? He tilted his head, faking hesitation. You told me to. What? Back then, he said softly. You said if I liked her, I should go for it, so I did. You forgot? Mary's lips parted, then shut again. He could see her working through the memories, trying to recall if she ever said that. Maybe she had, maybe it was in jest, maybe she never imagined he'd take it seriously. That was the beauty of it. She couldn't protest without sounding unhinged. Still, her jaw tensed. You were supposed to just act, not actually fall. David shrugged. It's just a crush, I'm sure it'll fade. He smiled then, the old stupid smile she remembered, the one that said I'm still yours. Mary exhaled, uncertain now. He walked away before she could recover. Back at home, David opened his texts to George. Operation Phase 3 complete, Mary's confused. George replied. And Sarah? David stared at the screen a while before replying. She's starting to wonder. The next day, David accidentally left his notebook on Sarah's desk. Inside it, she would find a short message tucked between chemistry notes. If you see through everything I do, does that mean you're watching too? When she handed it back, she didn't mention the note, but her eyes stayed on him for a second too long. Later that week, when the auditorium assignment board went up and listed event hosts, David Sarah, for the school showcase, she confronted him after class. This was Makoto's role, she said. Why are you up there? He held up his hands innocently. I guess they switched it. Makoto said he gave it up. Then I guess you know better than me, David said with a grin. Sarah narrowed her eyes. You paid him, didn't you? He didn't answer. She rolled her eyes. Desperate. David's smile didn't falter. Strategic. Her lips twitched. That night, she sent him a text. Do not mess this event up, I have standards. He replied. Then I'll aim to exceed them. She didn't respond. But at 1:13 a.m., she reacted to the message with a thumbs up. The war wasn't over. But a ceasefire had been declared. David stared at his phone's glowing screen in the dark. No new messages. It had been 4 days since he'd blocked Sarah, and nearly a week since their last conversation. The silence was calculated, intentional. He needed to know how much he mattered. He needed to know if she'd break her walls or just let him disappear. He faked a cold, claimed illness, took a week of sick leave. In reality, he was perfectly fine, just tired of second-guessing if he was winning or wasting time. George had messaged once. Bro, Sarah's been asking around, she thinks something happened to you. David didn't reply. The next message came from Makoto. Sarah looked like she was about to bite someone's head off today, might want to check in before she explodes. Still, he didn't move. Until the knock came. 3 sharp, urgent taps at the front door. David sat up in bed, hair a mess, hoodie half-zipped like a boy halfway between illness and emotional exile. His mother's voice echoed faintly up the staircase. David, a girl's here to see you. He didn't need to ask who. He was already moving when he heard footsteps coming up. The door opened slowly. Sarah stood in the frame, slightly breathless, her bag clutched tightly in one hand. She wore a plain gray sweater over a crisp white shirt, her eyes scanning him from head to toe as if expecting to see tubes, bruises, or bandages. You're not dying, she said flatly. David blinked, voice rasping deliberately. Who says? Sarah stepped in, eyes narrowing. You look fine. Lovesickness doesn't show, he whispered. She stopped mid-step, frown twitching. That's not funny. I'm not laughing. You blocked me, she said. You disappeared. You ignored me, he countered. For 2 weeks. She folded her arms, but the defensive stance cracked slightly. I was busy. You're always busy, he said. That's the excuse you gave the last 3 times you dodged me. Silence. Sarah looked away, jaw clenched. Her eyes stayed fixed on the corner of his room, the framed photo of a cliffside flower David had taken a year ago. Its delicate petals faced the sky defiantly. Is that why you pretended to be sick? She asked finally. Just to test me? Maybe, he said. Or maybe I really did get sick waiting for someone who never showed up. She exhaled, shaking her head. then stepped closer. But suddenly, another voice echoed from downstairs. Mary. David's heart dropped. He cursed under his breath and walked across the room. Sarah followed, confused. From the hallway, they heard Mary's flirtatious voice. Auntie, I brought medicine. I heard David wasn't feeling well. I should take care of him, right? Sarah's eyes snapped toward the door. David didn't hesitate. He pulled her into the room fully and shut the door with a firm click. Then he turned the lock. Sarah stared at him. What are you doing? Saving us both from a scene. From her or from being seen with me? David looked at her carefully. What do you mean? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Am I someone you can't be seen with? No, he said immediately. God, no. Then why the locked door? She asked, eyes narrowing. Why the silence? Why the emotional games? David walked to her and stood close, too close. Because I didn't know how else to reach you, he said. You don't respond to softness. You analyze every word I say like it's an exam question. You calculate everything before letting yourself feel. Sarah didn't answer. He added, voice quieter now, but I know you care. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. And if I do, what then? Is this some win for you? David stepped closer still. This isn't about winning. She met his gaze, her walls trembling. You planned everything, she said. Every encounter, every project pairing, every volunteer list. He nodded. I did. She looked away, lips pursed. Then how can I trust any of this is real? Because I stopped planning after I started feeling. Sarah swallowed hard. His voice lowered to a murmur. If I was still playing a game, I wouldn't be standing here afraid you might walk away. Her gaze softened. You're afraid? I've been afraid since the moment I realized I wasn't in control anymore, he confessed, and I don't like not being in control. Sarah stared at him, long and hard. Then, suddenly, she took a step forward and poked his chest. You're so frustrating. David blinked. That's your conclusion? Her eyes shimmered, and then, quietly, like she was letting go of something heavy, she said, you win. David didn't move. She added, voice firmer this time, I like you, all right? I tried not to, I really did, but you wormed your way in and now it's impossible to undo. His chest lifted with a breath he didn't realize he was holding. But before he could respond, Sarah raised a single finger. One condition. He nodded. Anything. Her eyes narrowed playfully. From now on, you won't be able to shake me off. David's lips curled into a grin. He walked to the window, cracked it open for air, and looked back at her. Deal. Sarah looked down, cheeks flushed despite the cool breeze. Also, you should unblock me. I already did, he said. She raised an eyebrow. He smirked. Right before you got here, I had faith. Her eyes rolled. Lucky guess. Footsteps echoed again from the hallway. Mary. Sarah look out. Ed at the door. She's still here. David nodded. Sarah glanced at him. Let me guess, you're going to pretend this conversation never happened and let her fawn all over you for appearances. David walked over and unlocked the door slowly. He turned the knob, then looked back at Sarah with a smirk. No. She blinked. He opened the door and called down, loud enough for the entire house to hear. Mom, tell Mary I'm busy. A pause. Then his mother's amused voice floated back. She already left. David turned back to Sarah. See? Sarah smiled faintly. Not too wide, just enough. She sat down on the edge of his bed like she belonged there. And this time, she did. The graduation ceremony was a perfect day, at least on paper. Golden banners flapped in the late spring breeze, folding chairs lined the courtyard in clean rows, parents filled the aisles with cameras and proud smiles, faculty members shuffled program notes with polished speeches, and standing center stage, side by side behind a mic, were David and Sarah. Co-hosts, their names printed on the event booklet, their voices guiding the transitions between performances and award announcements. Every time David handed Sarah the mic, his fingers brushed hers just slightly, just enough to be felt, not enough to be questioned. He didn't need to look at her to know she was smiling. He could feel it. They were coordinated now, in sync, the rhythm between them no longer forced, no longer calculated, just natural, a far cry from the cold stares and clipped sentences that had filled the months before. Everything was perfect until Mary stood up from the front row and walked toward the stage uninvited. The crowd murmured, confused. The program was still midway, no cue had been given. David's grip on the mic tightened. Sarah's eyes didn't follow her. She didn't need to. Mary walked slowly, deliberately, high heels clacking with confidence as if the ceremony had been arranged solely to spotlight her. She wore a custom-fitted white dress, shoulderless, elegant, designed to stand out beside the standard graduation robes. Her hair was curled into soft waves. Her lips were painted a delicate pink. She looked like she was ready for a press conference, not a school event. She stepped onto the edge of the stage and took the spare mic from the assistant. The MC tried to stop her. She smiled sweetly and waved him off. Then she turned to the crowd. "I just want to say something quick." Sarah's eyes finally moved, slowly, sideways. David remained still. Mary smiled, demurely at first, but with a fire behind her gaze. "I know we're all celebrating our future paths today, and I wanted to take this moment to say." She turned slightly toward David. "I'm excited for mine." The crowd looked on, puzzled. "I'll be going abroad next month," she continued, "and I'm not going alone." She reached out and, without warning, took David's hand in hers. "David's coming with me." A ripple of gasps, some cheers, some confusion. Flashes clicked from parents' phones, cameras zoomed. Mary leaned into the mic again. "It's been a long journey for us, 10 years of friendship, of loyalty, of love in its quietest form. I guess I was always too proud to say it, but today, I want to be honest." She turned and smiled at David, radiant and false. "I've decided to stop running, and I hope he has too." Silence. And then, David slipped his hand out of hers. He didn't say a word. Instead, he looked out into the crowd, then shifted his gaze toward Sarah. Her expression hadn't changed, calm, unreadable, but her posture was tense. Hands clasped behind the podium, shoulders pulled back like armor. David took a single step forward. "Mary," he said, voice calm but cold, "you're in my way." The mic picked up the words perfectly. Mary blinked. "I'm looking at my girlfriend," he added. The crowd murmured louder now. Someone dropped their water bottle in shock. Mary laughed awkwardly. "David, don't joke." "I'm not joking," he said. His tone was absolute, quiet but cutting, like a blade through silk. Mary's smile cracked. "You wouldn't even know her if I hadn't told you to chase her," she said, voice rising. "She was nothing to you until I put the idea in your head." Sarah finally moved. She stepped out from behind the podium, standing beside David, her eyes cool and elegant, dress fluttering slightly in the wind. Her gaze flicked toward Mary with the grace of someone who no longer cared what the other woman thought. "So what?" she said flatly. Mary turned toward her, face tightening. "Excuse me?" Sarah's eyes didn't blink. "You told him to chase me like it was some game, but he stayed. He kept showing up, he didn't stop. You don't get to take credit for that." Mary's jaw clenched. "You think this is real?" Sarah turned to David. "I know it is." And David, without hesitation, reached down, took her hand, and laced their fingers together. The crowd gasped again. There were phones up now, flashlights blinding, faculty frozen. Mary looked like she'd been slapped. "I made you," she hissed, voice trembling. "You were a background character until I picked you." David finally looked at her again, expression unreadable. "I was never yours," he said. "You just never noticed I wasn't playing your game." Mary stepped back slightly, breathing uneven. "You'll regret this." Sarah smiled faintly. "No, he won't." "I will," David said, "if I let someone like you keep holding the mic." He turned away, guiding Sarah gently off the stage, ignoring the chaos behind them. Someone tried to call him back to finish the event. He didn't even pause. As they reached the grass, Sarah whispered, "That was dramatic. I aim to impress. You always do." Mary remained on stage, face blank, hands clenched tightly at her sides. Behind her, George muttered something under his breath. The mic picked it up faintly. "And she still thinks she's the main character." The assistant tried to recover the ceremony, but the energy was already gone. Somewhere off stage, Two of Sarah's classmates whispered, did he really just call her his girlfriend? No, he claimed her, in front of everyone. Sarah heard it, and for once, she didn't look away. The air in the car was heavy. Sarah hadn't spoken since she climbed into the passenger seat, and David hadn't dared to turn on the radio. They were parked in the shadow of the old university library, windows fogged slightly from the late evening humidity. The street lights flickered outside, casting a muted orange glow over Sarah's profile. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, gaze fixed out the window. But David knew her silence wasn't apathy, it was restraint. The kind that came before either a final goodbye or a sharp slap of the truth. He didn't know which one she was deciding on. Say it, he said finally, voice low. Sarah didn't move. You lied. David's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. I heard you, she continued. That day, in the dressing room. You told Mary that she was the one who told you to pursue me. You made it sound like it was all her idea, that I was just a pawn in your drama. David exhaled slowly, turning his head toward her. It wasn't like that. She finally looked at him, eyes sharp and hurt all at once. Then what was it, David? He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Look at this, he said, unlocking it and handing it over. Sarah stared at the screen, then back at him. What am I supposed to find? Evidence. She hesitated, then took it. Her thumb scrolled cautiously. Message threads, contacts, pinned chats. The first was a contact named, Perfect Score, Crush Girl. Her brows lifted slightly. Seriously? David didn't flinch. That's been your name in my phone since the second semester of junior year. She continued scrolling. Blocked numbers. Mary's name was at the top. Blocked since 6 weeks ago. Sarah paused. This was... David nodded. Before the dressing room incident, before I even told her I was serious about you. Sarah kept reading. There were no active chats with Mary, no flirtation, no coordination. Just a timeline that clearly showed he'd cut her off before anything began. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. Because I knew what it would look like, he said. I'd been pretending to be her follower for years. I thought if I pulled away too fast, she'd cause problems. I needed her to believe I was still playing her game, long enough to protect what I was building. What were you building? David leaned his head back against the seat, eyes fixed on the ceiling of the car. A system, a network, something real. I used her as a filter, Sarah. Every person she hated, I paid attention to. Every friend she lost, I approached. If someone was kind to me while staying out of her circle, I remembered them. Sarah scrolled further through the contact list. Alicia, bullied, George, academic, Makoto, survival mode, Tina, anxiety meds, Luis, eats alone. Sarah's thumb froze as she read the list. These people. I helped where I could, David said softly. Sometimes money, sometimes connections, sometimes just listening, but every one of them had been either hurt, ignored, or mocked by Mary at some point. I didn't need to fight her. I just needed to find everyone she'd underestimated. Sarah's grip on the phone tightened. And what about me? She asked. David turned to her fully. You were never underestimated, he said. You were her obsession. The one person she could never beat, and the only one I ever genuinely wanted. Sarah's jaw clenched. You still lied to her, to protect yourself. I did, he admitted. And I'd do it again. Because if I had told her the truth, she would have gone straight to you, and I didn't want her touching what was finally becoming something good in my life. Silence stretched again. Sarah handed the phone back slowly. She didn't smile, but she wasn't angry anymore either. You're exhausting, she muttered. I know. You're manipulative. Not anymore. You're still strategic. I won't apologize for that. She looked at him, eyes flicking up to meet his again. David hesitated. Then added, I'm done playing though, I'm not chasing shadows, I'm not hiding behind fake friendships, I'm not pretending. Then what are you doing? He reached over and took her hand, fingers gently lacing through hers. I'm choosing you, fully, with everything. Sarah looked down at their hands, then back at him. You already have. Then, in a softer voice. Let's go visit your parents. David blinked. Now? You said I was important, time to prove it. He laughed under his breath, started the car, and shifted into drive. "You're scary when you're emotionally calm. I've been raised on logic and evidence," she said. "Now you've finally provided both." The ride to his house was quiet, but not heavy. When they arrived, his mother opened the door first. She blinked when she saw Sarah standing beside him. "Oh, it's you." Sarah bowed slightly. "I wanted to visit properly this time." David's father joined a second later. "Is this the girl who outranked everyone on the national mock exams?" "Twice," David added. His father looked Sarah up and down, then nodded. "Sharp eyes, son. I try." His mother pulled Sarah inside with unexpected warmth. "Come in, we have leftovers, unless David promised something fancy." Sarah smiled faintly. "I'll take warm over fancy any day." They all laughed. That night, after the meal and small talk, David walked Sarah to the door. She stood under the porch light, the soft yellow glow tracing her features. "Still want to go home?" he asked. She nodded. "But I'll be back." He leaned in, hesitated. "Can I kiss you now without it being strategic?" She smirked. "Only if it's also honest." So he kissed her. No games, no masks, no Mary, just the girl he'd waited for, and the truth between them. The graduation trip was supposed to be a peaceful farewell. The university had organized a modest but elegant overnight retreat in the hills, a mix of formal goodbyes and casual celebration. Bonfires were planned, photo booths were everywhere, professors mingled freely with students. Future engineers, lawyers, and artists lounged on picnic blankets like kids again. David arrived with Sarah, not holding hands, not flaunting anything. But there was no denying it anymore. The silence between them now felt like a language only they spoke. Her gaze didn't have to soften, it just landed on him, and he was already steady. He'd stopped needing to perform, he was finally just allowed to be. Until Mary showed up. She wore white again, fitted blazer, matching flared trousers, hair in waves, jewelry that caught the sun too aggressively. A small entourage followed behind her. The girls who used to mock Sarah were now trailing behind like they didn't know which side they were on anymore. Mary walked directly toward David as if the rest of the world had paused. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. She stopped a foot away from him. "I need to talk to you," she said quietly. Sarah looked up, but didn't speak. She simply walked a few paces away and stood beside George, who was already watching like a hawk. Mary waited for Sarah to leave earshot. She took a shaky breath. "I didn't mean for everything to spiral like this," she whispered. "You and we've known each other forever." David didn't blink. "You loved me," she said. "Everyone knew it. I was your first. You followed me around like I was gravity." He remained silent. "We can start over," she added quickly, stepping closer. "Abroad maybe, no drama, no games. We're grown up now. I've changed." David tilted his head. "You know what I find fascinating, Mary?" She blinked. "How your definition of change always starts the second you want something," he said, "and not a moment before." Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. He took a half step forward, his voice even. "You tried to control people with fear. You spread rumors when teachers scolded you. You turned friends into followers and followers into enemies. You crushed anyone who didn't orbit you." "I never did that to you," she said quickly. David's jaw tightened. "No, you didn't, because I never gave you the chance." Mary's smile broke for a second, then she reached for his hand, and he pulled it away. "Who in their right mind," he said slowly, "would date a girl who weaponizes rumors and calls it romance?" She froze. "You turned lies into currency," he continued, "and you were rich in them." Tears welled in her eyes. "David." He shook his head, and turned. Two security volunteers stepped forward discreetly. They weren't needed, but Mary refused to move. One of them gently tapped her elbow. "I'm not causing a scene," she murmured. David didn't look back. But he heard her footsteps fading, slowly, defeated, escorted away from the crowd she once ruled like a queen. He met Sarah's eyes across the lawn. She didn't ask what was said. She didn't need to. Later that evening, as the sky turned indigo and the last golden light melted into the horizon, David sat beside George near the bonfire. "She really thought you'd go with her," George said. David passed him a drink. She's been the main character in her mind for too long. George chuckled. And now? David looked toward Sarah, who was laughing with Alicia and a few others around a marshmallow skewer. Now she's background noise. University life began 2 weeks later. David majored in business and technology innovation. Sarah entered a dual degree program in law and data ethics. George, ever the academic workhorse, dove into applied research in cognitive computing. They all thrived. Sarah was voted student council director within her first semester. David's internship proposals were accepted across 3 departments. George, surprisingly, started dating Alicia after they both co-presented a case study and nearly fought over the conclusion slide. But David never stopped building. The network he'd started in high school continued to evolve, now cleaner, more genuine. People came to him for insight, collaboration, even quiet mentorship. He no longer needed a toxic presence to define who to trust. He had become his own filter. Still, Sarah remained his center. It wasn't dramatic. She never demanded flowers or attention, but she knew every detail of his routine, and he knew hers. They moved like partners. Equal, smart, unshakable. On their 1-year university anniversary, David asked Sarah to go for a walk. She wore a soft gray sweater and white sneakers, no makeup, just her and the moonlight, which shimmered gently over the campus lake. He walked with her in silence, then stopped beneath the archway where they'd once argued about everything. She looked at him, confused. "Are you lost?" He pulled something out of his jacket pocket, a ring box. She blinked. Inside was a delicate silver band, shaped like an elegant S, subtle, almost hidden within the curve of the design. Sarah stared at it, then looked at him. "Took you long enough," she said. "But yes," she added with a faint smirk. "I already decided a long time ago." David smiled. And for once, he felt no plan, no defense, no calculation. Just peace.